Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. To clarify any confusion, this is a re-recording of Thursday, October 6th Recon live stream because I had some technical difficulties when I was downloading it, and so a lot of it was corrupted. Anyway, this is the same thing. It's just bright out, and it's the following day. My name is Grace. I'm one of the digital organizers at the Redress Movement. This is the Recon, the Redress Conversation, a live stream that I do every other week, every other Thursday at 6:30 p.m. It is a live stream. I talk about various things related to the work that we're doing and also things that I find interesting or culturally relevant, however you want to say it. So this is weird because I'm not live streaming, so I don't feel the need to wait and pause for people to comment. But anyway, so today I'm going to be sort of going further on a point that I talked about in my last live stream 2 weeks ago, which was that we were talking about schools being segregated and schooling integration, and I was saying a lot of the reason schools are segregated is because those neighborhoods are segregated. And then I said, though we have seen a change in recent decades where you see more Black families moving into what have always been predominantly white neighborhoods. And I made the point and I said, that's not really liberation though. Like on the surface, that's good, but that's not really the end all be all. And I realized I just kind of said that and then left it and then walked away from it. And because I didn't want to get into it too much. But today I'm going to get into it a little bit more. So that's what today's episode is about. But first, a little icebreaker cue for all of you who are watching this now post because no one's here live. What kind of community activities did you do as a kid? Either in the summertime or after school programs, sports, arts, anything like that. I did a lot of art classes as a kid. I was very lucky. I lived in a town that focused a lot on the arts. So we had a lot of kid-centered arts programs, including I took dance lessons, I was in some community theater programs, took just classes that were aimed at kids to learn how to draw. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it for me. But what did you do? I was not a sports kid, so sports stories are very much welcomed. It's a different experience that I did not have. Okay, so let's just get into it. So again, last week I talked about segregated schools, and I started talking about how those are a product of segregated neighborhoods, and that on the surface, the Black families moving into white neighborhoods and that sort of integration is fine, but it's maybe not kind of the end goal of what we want to see in the world, right? So I knew I wanted to expand further on that this week, but as I started thinking about how to expand further on that, I was like, this is a very, very big topic to go through. There's a lot to this, right? I could talk about what happens when Black families move to white neighborhoods versus kind of what we hope is going to happen or what we may, without investigating further, think is happening. We could talk about why Black families might feel anxious about moving to a white neighborhood with both the history of being ostracized by their neighbors and also very current realities about being harassed by police who think that they don't belong in that neighborhood even though they live there. We could talk about why we don't see investment in Black communities for the people who already live there. And I just want to say I may touch on a lot of these topics in the future. It was just very expansive. My brain was going in 1,000 directions. But for today, this is what I settled on. For today, I want to focus on how I specifically said that wasn't liberation. And I want to expand on what I mean by that. And I want to offer you just one example, just one case study of what I think liberation would look like. I'm hoping to kind of spark your radical imagination for today. So I'm actually going to be talking about a neighborhood here in Washington, D.C., which is where I live, which is called Adams Morgan. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the history of organizing in Adams Morgan and the impact that had not only on the community of people who were there, but actually on the rest of DC and kind of the trajectory of Washington, DC from then on. So, yeah. First, though, I think I have to do a little some technical explaining about what I mean when I say liberation. And if you have existed in these circles for long enough, you are going to roll your eyes in the back of your head with the image I am about to pull up, and I am sorry for that, okay? I truly am. But this is the best way I can explain this, okay? So just bear with me. So, okay, let me pull this down so you can see it a little bit better. There we go. Oh, please ignore my tabs. Please ignore my tabs. So, let me just make myself a little small. There we go. Okay. So, again, if you've been in these spaces before, you know this diagram very well. And if you're not watching, if you're just listening, I'm going to explain to you what we're showing in this diagram. So, there's a baseball game and there's a fence. And there's 3 people standing behind the fence trying to view the baseball game. In the first panel, all the way on the left, it's titled Equality. And so each person, all 3 of them are different heights. One of them is tall enough they could see over the fence without any help. Another person can just not see over the fence. And then one person is about only half the size of the fence. So under the equality panel, each person is given a box to stand on. Now, the tallest person can easily see over the fence. They could have seen without the box. The middle person can now just see over the fence, so they're now able to view it and they weren't before. And the shortest person still can't see over the fence. So then the second panel is equity. So you see it's still only 3 boxes being used, but that person who didn't need a box, their box has been given now to the shortest person who now has 2 boxes and can see over the fence. And the middle person still has 1 box. So now everybody can see over the fence. So then the third panel is liberation. Liberation involves none of the boxes and the fence is gone. So what I like to talk about when I talk about this image, I'll get to this. So what I like to talk about with this image is that the fence really represents the barriers that can exist in life, right? Whether they're systematic or, whether they're, mostly whether they're systematic or even if they're on kind of an individual level, but it's the barriers towards the things you're trying to do, right? And the rights you want to have or the thing you want to get to. So when we talk, there's a lot of barriers, right? Let's just do like an example for illustration's sake of, we can use higher education as an example, right? So if you were to use higher education as an example for all 3 of these panels, right? Under equality, you might say that everybody pays, the same for college, right? College is one price for everybody, right? That would be equality. They're all under the same circumstances. Now, some people are going to be able to pay more or are going to be, that's going to be more affordable to them than to others. Some people are not going to be able to pay it at all. If you move that example over to the equity panel, you have something like you have a system of what people pay is based off of their income, right? So the folks who can afford to pay full price tuition do that, and the folks who can't afford that pay less in tuition. And then if you were to apply that to liberation, it was that, the barrier there to higher education in this example is income or is the price of education. So liberation would be you completely eliminate that barrier and you have free higher education, right? Or higher education that is, let's just say free higher education. So that's the example. That's what I mean when I say liberation. I mean that we have eliminated certain barriers that are restrictive in this sense, right? So I hope that that's a little bit more clear now. I do want to make the caveat that I have seen criticism of this visual used, and I'm not married to this visual. I just think it can be really illustrative and helpful. But I have seen criticism of this visual made that people say this kind of makes it seem like you're biologically predispositioned. It has to come back to like how you were born, and really these are like systematic things that are put on you. So they were saying, it can kind of go back to it can get a little like eugenics-y, and I hear that, I see that. I never noticed that, but I do think that's a kind of a fair critique of it. I don't have a better visual metaphor for you about this. But yeah, we're not saying that there's anything we're not saying that there's anything wrong inherently with these folks being different heights. And we know that it's not really about anything biological. This is just an example. What we're really trying to focus on is the situations of each person are different. And so they are affected by these barriers differently. And while we could channel our resources to get people over these barriers, which we may have to do in the short term, what we really want to do in the long term is get rid of these barriers altogether, because that's what's ultimately best for everybody and the best use of our resources, right? So now, bring it back to me. So now, let's get into what I want to talk about, which is Adams Morgan. Let me take a little sip here. I'm drinking some sparkly water. I'm sorry if you can hear the ASMR of my little bubbles. Okay, so Adams Morgan is a neighborhood in Washington, D.C. Like a lot of the places in the 1950s, you started seeing a lot of urban renewal happening in DC. It really started first, I understand it to be kind of in Southwest DC. In particular, the urban renewal that was going on in Southwest created a lot of displacement, and a lot of folks who were displaced out of Southwest ended up moving to Adams Morgan as an alternative neighborhood. So this made Adams Morgan a pretty diverse neighborhood, both racially and economically, especially because it had a quote-unquote an Americanization school, which served newly arrived immigrants. So you also had a large immigrant population that was moving to Adams Morgan. There was also 2 schools which were segregated at the time. One of them was for lower income Black students, and one of them was served predominantly affluent white students. But those were being integrated around this time. It was, they had to be integrated. This was also before home rule came to Washington, D.C., so there was no mayor or city council like we have today. So that's to set the scene for you about what Adams Morgan looked like as a neighborhood. So then during the 60s and 70s, you had a lot of innovative community programs and groups popping up around different issues. So it was around tenants' rights, it was around immigrants' rights, education equity, youth development, access to recreational and green spaces, and self-governance. Eventually, the neighborhood was actually able to get decision-making power over one of the elementaries, I think the only elementary school, Morgan Elementary School, in 1967. And this became one of the first community-controlled schools in the nation, and they renamed it Morgan Community School. Eventually, all of these different programs that were going on started kind of being looped under or coordinated under what was called the Adams Morgan Association, or the AMO. So they basically, with all of these programs connected together, you had this effective system of neighborhood self-government. Now, they didn't get any tax dollars, right? Because that wasn't how it was set up. But they were effectively, and it was all community run too. So it was all internal, right? So yeah, you had this effective little, self-government going on. And this would have a huge impact on the setup of DC once it would come under home rule. So yeah, they had control over the elementary schools. They had a community elected school board. They organized what they called block associations, which would eventually become the Adams Morgan Community Council. And so this was a way for blocks of people, of neighborhoods, to become really unified around what they wanted to see, to have one voice. And then they could also speak on behalf of residents in the urban renewal process. That in particular, when I read, I was like, wow, I really see how this has had a huge impact on the way housing organizing happens in Washington, D.C. Like, that idea of organizing the block is very much still that's so part of the ethos kind of a thing. There was also an organization called the New Thing Art and Architecture Center, which provided all kinds of different art classes, photography classes, performance classes, concerts for people to either participate in and learn, or just experience as an audience member. It grew into all different kinds of things. I couldn't even get a comprehensive idea of everything that they offered, but it was just anything and everything arts related. And it was primarily for kids so that they could feel stronger, smarter, more competent, and also to build kind of a collective consciousness around their experience, which I thought was just really amazing. There was also youth sport leagues, like the famous Ontario Lakers program. And they ended up developing like some neglected green space into like a park for them, which is now Walter Pierce Park. Walter Pierce was the founder of this program. So that still exists. You can see it today. So yeah, so it really just was, what was interesting to me was that it kind of sounded like you had everything you could need or want, and community members were making things as they saw the need to create them, right? As they saw, like the Ontario Lakers program, what's interesting about that is that really started because Walter Pierce and his brother said, there's all these kids running around and they don't have an outlet, right? Same thing with the New Thing Art Collective. It started because there were kids interested in what was going on and they wanted to, they had interest in it. And it was like, well, yeah, there needs to be something for them. So let's do it. Let's make it. And the community kind of banding together its resources to make that happen. And I just thought like that was, and I was just like, that's like so cool. Anyway, so, so in 1972, you had the founding of the Adams Morgan Association. They elected a chairperson and 25 representatives, as well as convened regular assembly meetings that attracted, all kinds of different residents. What I found really interesting about this was that they practiced participatory democracy. If you're not familiar with participatory democracy, that is when individuals directly participate in decisions that affect their lives rather than through some form of representation. So it seems like they probably had, obviously elected a chairperson and representatives, but they also were very much taking in that input from the community that was there in those meetings regularly. I think this is going to be more like interesting to DC people than to non-DC people. If you don't know about DC local politics, it's wild how some things are set up and how some things work. And if you ever want to have like a fun time, watch a DC City Council meeting. Anyway, but this model of the AMO, the Adams Morgan Association, the Adams Morgan Organization, actually served as a model for the neighborhood advisory commissions that DC would transition to when it got home rule. And so it really like showed like this is how you could have this input from the people living there and how you could have a community that's heavily, heavily involved in the trajectory of their neighborhood, right? And a big thing that the AMO worked on and advocated for was greater tenant protections. Now, if you did not know this, DC has historically had really strong tenant associations. Not quite as much anymore. A lot of them have been whittled away at, but still, compared to a lot of other places in the country, they have really strong tenant rights. So the AMO advocated for many policies which would help preserve affordable housing that already existed, including the second rent control law, which extended the right to purchase multifamily buildings, which we now call TOPA, the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. The Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act is this really unique piece of law in Washington, D.C. It basically gives tenants the first opportunity to buy their building if it goes up for sale. The point of this being what's the word I'm trying to say? This was really meant to protect renters from being kicked out of their homes by landlords who wanted to sell the property to make more money. So if a landlord wanted to just like sell the building and get out of it because, there wasn't any money to be made in it anymore, the first people to buy, like who have the opportunity to buy it, is the tenants, which is wild. And when you talk to people about it, I don't think people understand the impact of it sometimes, because it's like, well, how are tenants going to buy a building? And like, yeah, that's the point. Like how do you organize people around buying their building? But it's very much possible, right? So under Mayor Marion Barry, DC mayor for life, over 3,000 units of rental housing were converted to tenant ownership, which was only possible through TOPA. So it just goes to show you what a big impact this community organization, that in the beginning it wasn't about legislation, right? It was about, what do we need? What do we want in our home, in our neighborhood? And how do we do it? And then it became, hey, we have the power to have a big impact on decisions that are being made at the city level, right? And we can impact this legislation because we're unified, right? Because we have a shared understanding of what we want, because we're coming as a collective front, that they were able to get these kinds of things passed. And I'm like, that is just wild, because it you must imagine they always understood that this would have political power, but it's really that it started with just wanting to provide for one another and imagining something better and taking the initiatives like we're going to make it better for ourselves, because because in this case there was a void, right? There wasn't a city government to look to ask for, to do this, right? So it was like, well, we're all we've got. So you had to do it. But then that once there was a city government, they kind of didn't cower away from it. It was kind of like they made the city government kind of come to them. And the whole story just is really like, I love looking at it. Actually, I'll show you a picture that I particularly love. This is on the Smithsonian from their Anacostia Community Museum. This is a great picture of folks from Adams Morgan holding up their flag. They had a whole flag, and their motto was unity and diversity. And I'm just like, you had like a whole independent city. Like, that's so cool. Like, you guys were just your own thing. That's so cool. Sorry, just gonna geek out over it. Sorry, my bad. So yeah, I have a couple more thoughts. I do want to take a brief break for the culture, because I saw something on Twitter that I want to share that I'm not really going to comment too much on. I am really just going to like show and let it rock. Really hope you can hear the audio on this when I play it.
One thing you absolutely don't like about New York City.
There's a lot of things I don't like about New York City. You know what I don't like? They're always talking about the homeless and how New York City gets billions of dollars every year from federal government, state money to take care of the homeless. And it's got to be about $1 billion a year. And it's not even, I don't think, 100,000, maybe 200,000 homeless. They give you 200,000. $1 billion, 100,000 empty buildings in New York. They can just renovate them, but they'll take that money and buy a new van, get a kitchen somewhere, and get a paper bag, put a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in it, an apple and an apple juice, and ride around and give it to you. And I'm wondering, I know, it's a business. They don't care about the homeless. They care about the business. It's a business. And everybody is using the homeless, especially the city. I'm saying the city, the government is using the homeless to line their pockets. That's exactly what. So I don't like that.
One thing you absolutely don't like about New York City.
There's a lot of things.
I'm just saying, if you cure the disease, you can't make money off the symptoms, and that's all I'm gonna say, because I have nothing to add to that. That was just, I was watching that the first time, I was like, just hit everything. He just got the whole. Okay, so that was your little culture break. Remember that if you like seeing the funny things that that wasn't funny, but if you like seeing the things I find on the internet, you can find me at all of these handles. Well, that's an email, but you could email that if you wanted to. But you can find us on Twitter and on Instagram and on Facebook, and obviously on Twitch and here on YouTube. And you can see when I make those kinds of videos about things like that. You can see when I just see other ones that I think needs a little bit of a spotlight, that I just think are brilliant and absolutely wonderful. So feel free to check us out there. And if you have any other questions and you want to email us, you can email us hello@redressmovement.org. And you can also check out our website. There's a lot of cool resources there. If you enjoy these kinds of deep dives on places and you maybe want to do it on where you live, we have a ton of resources online to help you with that. So feel free to stop by our website, redressmovement.org. And I think that's pretty much it. So my closing thoughts on this short highlight of one community and their approach. And I didn't say this in the beginning. I had kind of a tough choice in a good way of picking a self-governing community that I wanted to highlight, because there were many options. These existed. There was a lot of like successful Black communities that were basically self-sufficient that have existed all over this country. You probably know about like Tulsa and Black Wall Street, and that is an example. But there was one in New York where Central Park now is. There's ones in the DMV area, also in like Maryland and Virginia. I think there was one in like Florida. There's a lot of them. I should have pulled up the thing that had like a list of them. But anyway, there's a ton of them to look at, and they're worth, looking into, especially finding out if there's one like that's in a neighborhood, that you never knew the history of. This was particularly interesting to me because I knew a little bit about, I picked this one a little selfishly because it is very close to me. So I know Adams Morgan, and I already knew a little bit about the history there, but I was interested to know more about it. So that's why I picked this one, but there's so many to look into, and I encourage you to do so. So yeah, one of the things that I love about the story of the organizing of Adams Morgan was that people were brought together across class and racial lines by the issues that were happening in their neighborhood, and also the vision they had for the better neighborhood they wanted, and the commitment to doing that. Like I was saying, this brings us back to the idea of barriers from before, where there were barriers in that really just there wasn't anything there, and there wasn't a governing entity to create those opportunities. They pooled resources to create that, right? And then they made it accessible to everybody in the community, right? So like an example of that would be like the New Thing Art Center. They had concerts that were like $1. You know what I mean? So there wasn't a space for kids to perform, and then B, there wasn't like entertainment for folks to enjoy, as a community. And so they created both of that, right? They created the opportunities for kids to perform, and then they also created, the space for those performances, and they allowed people to come in and made it accessible to them, right? And they didn't do it through legislation either, at least not right off the bat, because there wasn't a way to do that. So that community was really able to tear down those barriers for folks to participate and have access to these services all on their own. If you're wondering, what happened, because it's awful loud. If you're wondering what happened to Adams Morgan, and Adams Morgan still exists and is a community today, and it's got like so many things packed into such a small area. The thing to remember, it's obviously not self-governing anymore. The thing to remember is that self-governing little neighborhoods like this have their own, I don't want to say cost, but have their own, they obviously use resources, right? And the resources that I'm talking about are not necessarily monetarily, but they certainly require a ton of effort from each and every individual to upkeep that, right? Participatory democracy takes everyone, right? And consensus building takes everyone. It takes everybody participating, right? And that can be its own, like, drain on a personal resource, right? So as people move, go to other neighborhoods, as, folks grow up and leave, children grow up and leave and don't maybe come back to that neighborhood, the neighborhood changes, and sometimes the new people who come in don't have that want to participate like that, right? So I don't have the full details on how that kind of changed over time, but I think that it's safe to say that that's kind of part of it. So it's not to say that this isn't really hard, right? And doesn't take a lot of work. And I'm not trying to use Adams Morgan as the perfect example, but I just wanted it to serve as an example of what can be possible, because this was very much possible. It happened. It had a huge impact on the trajectory of DC going forward. It had a huge impact on the future of tenants' rights, in that it was big on the win of TOPA. And it had a huge impact, and it was very important, and it worked. It was very successful. So that's really the intention and the purpose behind today, behind this talk. I really don't have much else for you. I'm sorry for the noise. But that is pretty much it. That is what I'm going to leave you with, just kind of something to spark your imagination. Again, there are so many examples of communities like this that were really successful, and I encourage you to look those up and find out more about them. Maybe I can leave a couple in the description, just some for you to maybe peruse, because I found out a lot that I had never known about. And I think, in organizing work, we do not have to reinvent the wheel every single time. A lot of this work has been going on for much longer than some of us have been involved in it. And so it is not only like smart, but it is necessary that we know these histories, both of the places that we're organizing in and the organizing work that has taken place in those places before us. So this is just one example to kind of fuel your what did I say? Your radical imagination, your your radical imagination. I'm gonna stick with that. So anyway, that is all I have for you this week. Again, my name is Grace. I'm a digital organizer at the Redress Movement. I stream every other Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I believe I'm going to start bringing these streams to Facebook as well as Twitch, so you can join me wherever you want. Or obviously, you're watching this one on YouTube because it's re-recorded, but they go on YouTube usually the following day after the stream, so you can always watch them there as well. But that is all I have for you. Thank you for watching the Recon, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.